Well, fáilte thula daine ha cuat, ha mi toliche gun nanig siú cúnlarain. Welcome everyone watching this presentation. My name is Angus Morrison from Acair, and I'm delighted to be joined by Bill Innes. Bill Innes is no stranger to the Gaelic world, and he's no stranger to Acair either, having worked with Acair for a number of years. He received the Lifetime Achievement Award at the Scottish Gaelic Awards a few months ago. And recently, Acair has published a new edition of this book, which is Chì Mi, the poems of Bàrdachd Iain Dhonnchaidh. And I'm very pleased that Bill is here to tell us about the book. Bill did a lot of work on the editing and translation of this book. If I hand over to Bill, and we'd be very pleased, Bill, if you gave us a little bit of information about the book Chì Mi.
Well, Bàrdachd. John Macdonald was born in this house in Kildare in South Uist, where the outstanding view of the South Uist hills and the ever-present sound of the sea were to prove lifelong influences on his poetry. This beautiful new revised hardback edition of Acair reveals the astonishing range of his work, from the humorous Gaelic songs of his youth through the universal themes of love, death, romance, war, religion, politics, through to the philosophy of his later years. His importance to the Gaelic canon is due to the fact he is the missing link between traditional verse for recitation and modern literary nuavarsta. When I was boarded out in South Uist in 1942, it was to discover an island at least 2 decades behind the rest of the country, with most families still living in thatched houses without electricity or running water, at a level of poverty few could even understand today. But the people were rich in community spirit, and I discovered I had inadvertently stumbled into the very heart of what James Delargy of the Irish Folk Commission described as one of the richest stores of traditional Celtic folklore in the whole of Western Europe. The forum of transmission of that culture was the Carey House, where in the old thatched cottages, folk gathered round a central fire to tell stories which could last an hour or more, recite epic poems which might have hundreds of lines, sing songs, play pipes and fiddle. On the other side of the Roag from my new home was another thatched house, a humble little cottage which had been the birthplace of Donald Donald McIntyre the Paisley Bard. Yet that little thatched house had been such a centre for Cayley and debate that it was known locally as a Bàrdachd. Donald McIntyre might have left school at 14, but he won the Bardic crown at the Mod in 1938. And Spáil Dàin contains some of the most powerful epic traditional poetry ever composed in Gaelic. On the other side of Loch Roag, you can still see today the house where Donald McIntyre's nephew, Donald John, was born. It too had been a famous Cayley house, thanks to Donald John's father, Duncan, who could trace his lineage back through North Uist to the Macrorie bards at Clondonald and Skye. He was one of the last traditional storytellers in Uist, and the Reverend William Matheson of Edinburgh University said of him that he had never met anyone with his knowledge of the history and culture of the Gael, and that entirely from the oral tradition. Not only could he tell word-perfect stories of more than an hour, he could sing ancient poems, including the Fingalian ones. Donald John went to school a mile and a half away in Howmore, barefoot except in winter, and I think the intensity of those 9-year-old eyes seems to foreshadow the title of this book, Chì Mi, I See. This picture shows the 18-year-old Donald John, already composing songs by then. His father Duncan is in the middle, back up. His father Duncan is in the middle, was his mother Margaret, the second right. She was a sister of Donald MacIntyre, and there was a traditional belief that bardic ability was transmitted by the maternal line. In fact, she and her daughter Kate on the right probably knew just as much as the men, but folklore collectors really thought to ask the women. But the interesting figure is this man. That's Neil, Donald John's uncle and Duncan's brother. Now, Neil was a much shyer man than his extrovert brother, but he knew just as much of the folklore as Duncan did. But the folklore collectors, again, never thought to ask him. But he was the guy who really brought the family up, because Duncan was always away working, building houses in various parts of the island. Like many other young men, Donald John joined the TA for the excitement of getting a paid holiday away at the annual camps. And he couldn't wait for war to break out, for the excitement he was going to experience as part of it. That was to end in cruel disillusionment when the 51st Highland Division was captured at St. Valery. He had 5 miserable years as a prisoner of war, but they gave him the opportunity to develop his bardic gift. He started the poem which won him the bardic crown in Poland, and he said he learned more in those 5 years than he might have learned in a whole lifetime at home. The traditional poetry is composed for recitation or singing, so the local accent or dialect is a crucial part of the poetry. It has to be heard. In this example, the vowel-only rhyme or assonance is not obvious from the page. In South US Gaelic, Adif becomes Adu and rhymes with Basu. Internal rhyme was an important assistant to memory in longer poems. So if you look at those just 4 lines he composed during his imprisonment, Ucha uish gidid uaso, Jesus tool banadu. So uaso has an internal rhyme with tuaba in the next line. Gidid green and tools of oike, kuchta tuuler de orda basu. So tools of oike, internal rhyme with de orda bas. Basu rhyming, as I said, with adu. If we look at the big poem, which won him the Bardic Crown, Mulligays, it's about 12 verses of 12 lines each 12-line verse being composed of 4 triplets. And we look at the demanding nature of the meter that he used. Each triplet can be looked upon as 3 rhyming lines, where the last 5 syllables in each line are in assonance. Havashagash yopadanat, Havashagash yopadat, and Rahina Vraskal Radati, Kaswudachtos the Hatsahat, Yorbion. And that tag at the end of the triplet is rhyming throughout the poem. In other words, there's about 48 rhymes for Yorbion, all different. And it's no wonder that modern poets are really able to tackle this sort of ancient meter. But it was not regarded by the old bards as a business of education. Donald Allen Macdonald said, there is not enough education in the world to make a bard. This was a gift that the bards inherited, the ability to compose these elaborate Gaelic meters. At the time that Donald John was in school, Gray's 18th century elegy in a country churchyard was staple fare in schools. In it, Gray mused on all these humble people in the churchyard who had never been given a chance in life. What might they have achieved given opportunity? Well, that had obvious resonance for Donald John, and he achieved the remarkable feat of translating it into Gaelic, obeying traditional Gaelic rules, while retaining Gray's meter as well. So for those who don't know the poem, the curfew tolls the knell of parting day. The lowing herd winds slowly o'er the lea. The ploughman homeward plods his weary way and leaves the world to darkness and to me. Just keeping that rhythm in your head in a minute, listen to the Gaelic. A glat de boer the cwch like snoar bar. Haras a hwan hadad a glwys is grey. And troi trwy'r gytriol gyhwyr cartab. So like sued, go ahead, sued again. It's a brilliant translation, and the late Dr. John McInnes said it was a work of genius. That was the scene when Donald John was crowned Bard in Glasgow at the age of 29. All the Guish had won him the Bardi crown. While it is a remarkable work for someone in his early 20s, it was still at apprentice level compared to some of his later work. For example, Uayoharkis, another long poem, 17 verses, 12-line verses. Because sound is so important in digital poetry, it is particularly difficult to convey its lyricism in English. This is verse 15 out of the 17. And when Donald John had returned from the war, he found the neglected grave of a world-worn sailor. When DJ returned from the war, he found the neglected grave of a world-worn sailor buried outside the wall of the ruined Howmore Church. This is the only verse where I felt my translation did justice to the original. If no one else looked after the grave, then the forces of nature would. The good spirit be bias, which in Corée had an hour, which in the shade check my Bàrdachd Dhòmhnaill. So got the green to say, if you I shame of the splash, so you eat a shall time of that honor. The whole of wild in the bruidhinn, the Ustifies in the wish, when the Havan on the cruise was walls. And he could down with the door again, who lived near the Magor shore. A horse at the end of the door, said you call that. With when electricity came to South Uist, most of the traditional bards just gave up composing because their audience had gone. Donald John was the only one who was able to convert his style. And he wrote, once we made songs to be sung, now we write poetry to be read. And as an example of the tradition from traditional to modern, I show this poem. The township of Snowshill had been his father's birthplace. It was virtually deserted when he composed this short poem, which has been particularly well received across the Atlantic. The thought process is completely modern, and that makes it much easier to convert to English. But the vivid, concrete imagery of traditional poetry is still retained. Cuideachd Beurla is there of the with Lord. Tocht is aardje, Cì Mi, Chì Mi, Beurla. Daar for the Barbers, Shadach, Screen, the Harriman, Bàrdachd Layers. Tazach for the Barbers, Darrow, Tarangala, and Large. How would ye to the Traven? How would Bàrdachd the Good? Tal the news about for Bucher, Tallow, Alapart, Dumag of Lulu. Whiskish of the fate the Cuideachd. So the Goily, for my heart, Black the Best, Sound the Cuideachd. Is got on doing the fast. How for spirit Garamal Berta, stat a clash to has Beurla, the last of the heights na huish, take the brewer for two for all. The bias blast the heel to, so do the years had a tale. A verses the do we chuvo, but be the rules had a asses. She got the tully set up shop. Super actual the ballad. Like the Russian calls it, do how the sutra, how the dàin. You can understand why that has a resonance in places like Nova Scotia and Virginia and Carolina, which are full of US people. But the other pride in his Gaelic culture and hope for independence for his country runs through his work as he calls on his people to wake and remember the spirit of their forebears. He was saddened that his people were embracing English culture, while a Pakistani trader who lived in my township had learned Gaelic to sell his wares to the Caliph. Allah Bernat Lyot Dooley, and Gashish the Fane to the Wyatt, could you hear this Prusachille glue at the dress the wood? Could you hear the cave the Husher, the Macadollas be of the Wyatt? At chwai ha, pat chwat arana, gis gas da harakat si bwyd. Yw seri ti gasasi, tarsin i'r achgyd y gawd. I bwyd yn eich ad y Beurla, hart a weil, yn sfect y beawd. Ach dŵr i sgrwm o'ch y dŵsgyl, yn hig dy hŵr o gydoia. Hiw Gaelic yn Gaelic. Sac Pakistanis gyda'r. Agus at east, he was also deeply concerned that folks seemed to have forgotten the sacrifice and suffering endured by his generation. Perhaps even more relevant today when we have two generations of only experienced war on TV. Susa, eadar-theangachadh, the Gaelic dàmhnaill Susa, bruidhinn, roi por fallen the dàin. Jarach was of the day and told us the heart. Thought no heart of a father, sad galley to the all. He and the hostel did and old chile like a clown. Dus look more for them children. I wish you knew that the county. And this next verse I find so powerful that it just makes me emotional to read it. Salta utre med kudo, tal om orden med hörte. Vad året var du sa, solen kunen för åken. Fed like he was care and fresh out of Europe. The soil was once still eyes of young men. I'm sorry. Gets me every time. I vilka hade man en skid, det var hängel av kyrk. Ja, det ligger gynna av hus och det djupast kluva till kyrk. Har jag dullat det brud, det åka runt sin hörpe, och sitta gläg och huset, och skit ut i den draken. The last bit. Who's the ones for some donut and the crumble coupon? So the sound of room. I can't clue the paroque. The board hangel teleki and put a head in the hard show. See at the end of food. Unlike most poets, he was very kind to others. Unlike some modern, perhaps not most, but unlike some modern poets, he was incredibly generous to other Gaelic bards. He wrote one poem celebrating Lewis man, Macdonald's visit to Ulis, and this elegy on Bàrdachd death. Hos cuideachd Maoris, hai kel the book, hai a can and a card of agent draw the tools. Sa for gallery of fringe, the glugna hui, we rule of the Buddha, after we look at the Harlan, dàin the facing, and the death to your cana. It's dàin the needle, the dheidhinn in the grabbers. Spirit kilt your caduchish, half you look at the water. Take the beans in a carco and a glass of the calorie. In a rouge at the deer, clear here's the daughter. Another was Sonny Campbell of North Glendale, one of the Campbell Bardic family. And DJ was deeply moved on seeing the ruin of his house. Only a gable now remains. But Paul McCallum, oops, sorry, try that again. Paul McCallum, who can be seen at the right of the old gable, has done a brilliant recording of the poem that Donald Dunn composed. Full of issues to dawns, you heard the dawns no bow. Well, who looking hard at the house at the house. Ach, rhyw smaen ys hyn, to clear the level. Ach, wedi chi gat help, ach, yn bach codi sy'n lew. Who fascus kindness, the Harry Campbell the bar. But do dachi yn eidys, hates the bites me rai. Soon after the vacuum, you the hool and sabas, and do the useful should call out to make a hell that was. Nach ybych sianachas ys ôl a ni gys y boed i ffobris. Tu fy yellow yn yet hawai. The jid y mod ag nach rŵs. Gyd gast at geili. A hasti leis y drws. Fe lasach chide canawt y trich gyda'r i sy'n bwys. Pero sli yn y rwy'n, y helwy siw, sŵr dros y day. Balaf sa hofwr go, hadan am sgwb tas y ceis. Fer dair yn Holland, gwsyd dag ar gydei, sŵr y gŵl y mewn rad, the cwy of art ag y thing. D.J.'s Catholic faith features often in his early work, but his church was a broad one, and his philosophizing has been a rich source of sermon ideas for ministers as well as priests, as demonstrated by these three verses from Fisca Behe, The Evening of Life. The last one is inscribed in the memorial cairn for a minister's uncle by the main road in South Lewis. Had talan the hoesje, nach het barbaars door je gloeisje. Snabel alleen te de gooien, som til de gooien wat doen. Jes mich a skriet de baard, akskat van de einde de gazi, had dat van heen had halen, ze roi de gras is stuw. Us a kubus of eerkog, de goede karm haregu, na roep de farage no eker is herake had in de roe. We hoorden ook gooien in de keel, could je terug aan je steeds. En sjálf go súrach in téad gach na hana héin was van de roe. Cúm na troine go háid, go tíoch do hís de braha. Go ús a dúcht as an bada, í an dana, jarrig and smooth. Ge nach dúad at a haiflis, na rin de nuas a le boide. Na súla géi a sausje, like lík a gaim an tíú. In around, over in a block. Finish.
Oh, well, tapalaish, Gajarav, Sunshin, Bill, thank you so much for that presentation. Can I ask a couple of questions for you? First of all, how did you approach the translation? Was it a real challenge? Because Donald John had so much rhythm and internal rhyme. What was your approach?
Yes, well, that's, as I said, makes it so difficult to translate the traditional poetry, because the meters are important, and these governed his choice of words because he needed all these words. So the task was to try and produce something which is fairly literal without being literal, if you see what I mean. Try to capture some of the lyricism. Obviously, you can't replicate the sound. I mean, I met Donald John just after the war when he came back. He was 14 years older than me, but we had an absolute rapport, and we used to write to each other when I was at school. And he sent me some of his poetry, including the translation of Gray's Elegy, by the way, because he knew I was doing that at school. And I really identified with his poetry in a way which I didn't with all the dead works I was studying at school. And it happened that I had a year working in Rome, where I was living on my own. And I started just to see if I could translate some of the poems. The modern ones are easy, as I said. The thinking in the modern ones is very up to date, and the actual rhythm is not quite so important. But the thought process translates more easily into English. But the traditional poetry took a lot of work, and some of it, obviously, I'm happy with some bits and others. But on the whole, I really feel I've got as close to his thinking as I possibly could.
Yeah. Now, I know that you believe that in some respects, Dhòmhnaill Iain is quite similar to Burns. Could you expand on your reasons for thinking that he can be compared to Robbie Burns in some way?
Well, in the first place, he was a great admirer of Burns. There's many Gaelic poets. Well, Donald John's uncle, Macdonald, actually translated Burns, as many people will know. He did a brilliant, not translation, but a but a paraphrase of Dheidhinn because it's twice as long as the original Dheidhinn, and it's one of the most wonderful pieces of Gaelic poetry for recitation, 400 lines of it. And he started translating other pieces as well. And Donald John actually wrote a poem in praise of Burns. And although he didn't actually translate Burns, his poem for the duck, for Lacha, is very much in the Burns mold of extracting a deep moral from a simple rural incident. And the only reason I said he is the Gaelic Burns is because I can't think of any other Gaelic poet with this range of output. Burns, we took a bit of stick for including some of the light poetry in the book, but would you take that out of Burns? You know, Burns wrote a wide range in all sorts of topics, and as I said, I don't know anybody else in Gaelic who has this range that you see in Chì Mi.
Now, I know that this book is a new edition, and it came out first of all in 1998, I think, by Berlin.
96, I started work on it.
And it was Berlin who published it. So yes. Why did you feel it was appropriate now for a new edition of the book to
well, it went through a major revision in 2001. And in fact, it was one of the few Gaelic poetry books ever to go into a second edition, having sold out the first edition. But to me, I think this work will resonate with future generations, even if only through the English, that they understand that this lad who left school at 14 could write at this stuff of this quality and of this obvious intelligence. By going to hardback, and the reason it's important that the book goes into hardback is that it will last longer than the original paperbacks. And of course, it gave us the opportunity to do considerable revision of the translations and tidy them up and just make them a little bit closer. With translation, you can never find the ideal set of words, but you keep looking for the most just.
Yes, yes. Oh, well, and Bill mentioned there that the book is hardback, and it really is a beautifully produced book. So the book is available from Acair, and it's really a beautiful book. So I think we'll wrap it up there, Bill.
Okay.
Thank you for those of you who are watching, and thank you very much to Bill. I should also say that Iain Dhonnchaidh, Donald John Macdonald, is also the author of Foillseachadh Swastika.
Is that still your best-selling book?
Oh, well, it's one of them. It's a real classic, and it's available with a parallel English translation, which was done by Bill as well. And also comes with a CD of Donald John reading the book. So that's also available. And also from Acair is available Cuideachd, which was written by Donald John Macdonald as well. So some wonderful books available from Acair. So thank you to Bill, and thank you to all of you who are watching. Tá Bàrdachd Dhòmhnaill Iain Dhonnchaidh agus Aonghas Moireasdan. Tá Bàrdachd.